Hey everyone, Jessica here, and I'm just going to present some tools that we use at ASIJ in order to help students fulfill the competency of reflecting on their work and reflecting on feedback that we give them on their work in a couple of different ways. We've built a couple of different types of rubrics. We don't always use the same type of rubric depending on what phase of learning we're in. And I'm going to just kind of show you the two different types of rubrics that we use and talk about when and how we use them. So essentially, I put these competencies up here and the outcomes associated with them. These are the GOA core competencies and the associated outcomes that I think this particular activity sort of assists with and helps students work through. And this is, again, those pieces on reflection. But essentially down here, we have an example of a rubric we use at a formative assessment. So sort of when we're still in the learning phases. And basically here we have students that are trying to develop sort of the skill we're trying to get them to work on is developing a visual model to aid in understanding a phenomena. That's part of a science practice that we teach here. So they're using models. And in this formative assessment, or this formative phase, we give them the steps of what their model should include. So we actually include the criteria that we're looking for, and we spell that out for them. So we've got this criteria here in the middle, and essentially we use this either as teachers, or we give it to students to use for peers, or we give it to students to reflect on their own work, and they can actually look at it and say, is this happening or is this not happening? So are there captions? Are there visual representations? So it's sort of a checklist, but it also allows for some room for feedback. Like, you need to work on this. You're kind of doing this, but this is what's missing, or you're doing this really well. And so it's kind of a nice list. We would not use something like this in a summative assessment. A summative assessment, we expect kids to do things independently without having all the different pieces sort of laid out as clearly. Not to say that we haven't taught them that, that's in the formative section, but by the time they are on a summative assessment that we want them to show their work, we want them to be doing that independently. So here, later in the unit, we may be having them use the same, we're looking for all of this, but what we put in our summative unit, or summative rubric, is just as using a model to explain phenomena. Then we talk about their performance. Did you do it? To what level? Here we use achieving, approaching, and beginning, and students all know what that means. Where would you find that? And then I would talk about how you did. So like if you were only beginning here, I would then go back and sort of talk about this criteria and what we're missing. But again, the piece being here is in this formative piece, we really lay it out for them, give them that checklist, allow them to do that learning. Afterwards, when we're at the summative stage, we don't necessarily we want them to be able to do that work independently and not necessarily just be following a checklist. They should know what a good model has at that point, and we expect them to have all of those features built in their full understanding. That's part of their understanding. Again, I think this formative piece helps with the reflection. It really helps students break down. They can talk about where they are in their learning. And then having this laid out is really helpful in those first stages, the formative stages, the teaching stages. And then having a place for feedback on their performance at a later stage is also helpful. If there's any questions, please let me know.